What's going on, ladies and gents, boys and girls, guardians of all ages, Joker back again, once again. So, over the past week, Luke Smith has been publishing an overly indulgent Herculean diatribe that just so happens to read like the greatest hits of my YouTube channel. Vindication, motherfuckers! Doesn't even begin to describe it! And let me tell you, everything from Luke Smith saying, full disclosure, I'm almost always going to focus on opportunities for improvement rather than celebration, as if I don't feel that on a deep and spiritual level. Kinda, sorta the modus operandi of this channel, you know, improvement. So from that tacit admission to the return of Twilight Gap to overtures so blatant as to the return of Trials of Osiris that you would need to be simultaneously blind and have glaucoma not to see them, to the myriad of instances of Luke Smith basically saying, yeah, we kind of fucked up. It was all music to my ears, to say the least. Hell, this shit had me harder than Lord Shaxx watching Forged in Fire, with all the accompanying shrill squeals of delight and ecstasy. And while the catharsis of Vindication is a high like no other, to the point that I may actually need to invest in nipple clamps and a cattle prod to get off like that again, this isn't Catholicism, motherfucker. You don't get to just say, my bad, and kinda sort of explain the situation, and then suddenly, magically, everything is copacetic. Sure, one could certainly be forgiven for mistaking this 20-page bloated monstrosity as Luke Smith's attempt at earning an indulgence, but it doesn't mean shit if you don't do anything with it. Look, it's one thing to address that something is a problem. It's an entirely different thing to actually remove Activision's smegma-encrusted cock from Destiny's puckering asshole. And I know what you're thinking. Well, Bungie left Activision. Yeah, but or Destiny 2 still kind of reeks of Activision. And hey, to be fair, that's going to be the case until we get a significant piece of new content. Then again, ladies and gents, boys and girls, guardians of all ages, we already have a release being pushed back, on top of Bungie saying that a past content release schedule was untenable, while simultaneously doubling down on that past release schedule. What? But I'm getting ahead of myself. Look, all I'm humbly supposing is that while an admission of guilt, or whatever the fuck this was, is nice, how about we skip the foreplay and get to the nuts and bolts of how things are gonna actually change? No? You first want to wax pedantically about the last year? Okay, fuck it. Two can play this game. Now, I could read verbatim the 12,000 words Luke Smith has enshrined to Bungie.net, but honestly, only about 1,000 to 2,000 are actually worth your time. Which you can imagine makes me feel really stupid for being excited about it. What I thought I was getting was a compare and contrast between Destiny 2 of this year and Destiny 2 of next year and where they want to take the franchise. That's kind of what happened, but not really. Again, it happens in that 1,000 to 2,000 words that are worth mentioning. Everything else is fluff. It's a lot of, we have problem, we should fix problem, but we're not necessarily going to be pinned down on the details here and now, with the exception of the aforementioned 1,000 to 2,000 words worth your time. But I'm getting way off script. So how about I go ahead and give you my opinion of the last year, basically kind of shepherded by this article. Not that we don't already have a YouTube channel dedicated to that endeavor, but instead of watching a dozen or so videos, or reading the blog equivalent of War and Peace, let's do the relative, and keyword relative, TLDR. The last year has not been about fixing Destiny. Anyone with a functioning frontal cortex can see that. What the last year has been is an exercise equivalent to trying to keep a sinking ship afloat. And as bad as that sounds, which it's meant to, I do have to commend Bungie for their effort. Without significant overhauls to systems like subclasses, there's very little actually fixing what's left of Destiny 2. What Bungie should be doing, and what I think they have been doing, is throwing shit against a wall and seeing what sticks, on top of trying to wait out Activision. Prime example, Armor 2.0. While this will provide a nice little deviation from the standard way that Armor has been traditionally done in Destiny, we're clearly about to be alpha testing what I hope will be a core system in Destiny 3. And that's one of Destiny 2's biggest problems. Everything else that still needs to be fixed is foundational. So here's the paradox. Do you fundamentally change things like the subclass system, a hypothetical year out from your next release, or do you carry on my wayward son to the next release? So what Bungie's been trying to do with the sinking ship that is Destiny 2 is plug holes, patch sails, and desperately try to pump the water out to stay afloat to varying degrees of something that resembles success from afar if you cock your head and squint. I mean, let's be real. Destiny 2 wouldn't be going free to play if it was printing money. And I by no means am saying that Destiny is dead. Clearly, it's not. We've seen games come and go and die. This isn't it. But it is maintaining, and it is struggling to stay afloat. And like that app maritime analogy would be harsh on the ship crew, it's no easier on the Bungie staff. At one point in this post, Luke Smith takes a moment to talk about the rapid creation of content and the mobility required to run a game-as-a-service type game, and how it's been rough on the development team, which is the exact same thing they said with Destiny 1. Say it with me, ladies and gents, boys and girls, guardians of all ages, making content is hard.
Part of this on Kotaku, what Bungie decided was we can't do this anymore. This is just too much. This is too hard for us to do. The tools that we work with are really hard to deal with. It's hard for us to make this much content. It's just hard making content in general.
But the annual pass was harder on the team than we anticipated. The scope of what we delivered, the pace that we delivered it, and the overall throughput for the annual pass takes a toll on the Bungie team. So let me make sure I understand once again what's going on here. You pivoted from the DLC content that was Destiny 1 because it was untenable to the Season Pass. Now, the Season Pass is untenable, so you guys just decided to what? Not even just double down. Through some Herculean leap in logic that us mere mortals will never be able to comprehend, you decided to triple down. Look, I'm not saying, I'm just saying. If you thought the content with this Season Pass was sparse and disposable, hold on to your fucking asses. I mean, here we stand, yet again, once again, on the precipice of Bungie making the same exact DLC mistakes that they've made since Destiny 1. All over again.
It's hard for us to make this much content. It's just hard making content in general.
There's a point where sympathy for watching somebody take a blunderbuster to their goddamn foot goes out the fucking window. But hey, you know what? This time, maybe they figured it out. Sure, they don't have Vicarious Visions or High Moon Studios to help them out anymore, but hey, something fucking details. But since we're talking about the Season Pass, let's talk about the Season Pass's failing. Because, snark aside, I actually legitimately feel bad for these people working on it, at least the grunts. You know, the people that Luke Smith goes and talks to, that tell him that they're getting burnt out on creating all this content. If anything, they can take solace in the fact that the last year has been an experiment, an exercise in futility that builds a game wide but not tall. The vast majority of content since Forsaken was created to be one and done. This understandably leaves portions of the player base frustrated when we get DLC like Season of the Drifter, which essentially boils down to nothing more than a paid quality of life update for fucking Gambit. A game mode that, might I remind you, shipped with a meta so busted that I refuse to believe that anyone who played tested it actually plays the fucking game. This game mode was in desperate need of unfucking from the word go. If you are perhaps a little perplexed as to why something like Season of the Drifter or the entire Season Pass exercise in general might leave people wanting, might I point out the 32 flavors of easily disposable, I can't believe it's not a horde mode. Look, I love mindlessly shooting the shit out of AI so bad it can't hit the broadside of a space barn in a game where physics damage, falling off a cliff, and instant kill mechanics with the occasional surprise motherfucker from one of Destiny's 32 flavors of suicide grunts are all you really have to worry about. And by the off chance that you somehow magically miraculously die, death really isn't that big of a deal for 99.99999999999 at nauseum % of the game modes. It's just not generally punished. If I would be so kind as to allow myself one more self-indulgent digression, take a moment to really think about how wasted the AI and enemies are in this game. This is a franchise that has an alien race made of liquid glass. And instead of getting Liquid Terminator, the best Bungie could do is what? Not basically steampunk robots? With all the unbridled mobility of a salt-encrusted Hatsune Miku body pillow. Excuse me, the fuck? And then somehow, someway, Bungie is flabbergasted when players constantly break the game, as if shooting what could only be very generously called artificial intelligence at the best of times, that does little more than line up and flail bullets in your general direction, is difficult. Now, you may be wondering what all of this has to do with the Season Pass. Well, kinda sort of everything. After all, when the keystone piece of content for each individual Season Pass DLC is a new flavor of disposable horde mode with some kind of random twist on it, it gets a little repetitive. I mean, realistically, how many of these not horde modes do we actually need? The ironic travesty, of course, is that all of these different horde modes that Bungie has introduced all have an expiration date. Not just because they're tied to a super specific loot pool, which makes absolutely no sense when you think about it, because this game has vendors for most of these events, and you could just refresh the vendor loot. But the real Achilles heel to the 32 flavors of not horde mode that Bungie has relentlessly introduced into Destiny 2 is that they're all themed. And they're not true horde modes. These modes don't have the staying power of, say, Gears of War's horde or Call of Duty Zombies, because they are based around a gimmick that gets old well before the season, DLC, and expansion it's released in does. To say absolutely positively nothing about map variety. Here's an idea for you, Bungie. The next time you want to try and reinvent the wheel, how about we do this? For your next iteration of Horde, try, I don't know, actual fucking Horde? It's an oldie but a goodie. Slaughter your way through 50 waves of increasingly difficult enemies with the occasional boss wave. Use PvP maps so that the maps don't get old. That said, if we look at the Gambit maps, the Forge maps, the Reckoning maps, the Menagerie, basically any PvE environment, the AI may be missing the 2 fucking electronic brain cells required to circumnavigate these areas. And hey, if it sounds like I'm busting Bungie's balls for their AI having the average intelligence of a lobotomized snail, well, it's because I fucking am. However, getting back to something that resembles a fucking point, what the AI of Destiny lacks in intelligence, Bungie makes up for in spades when it comes to curated mechanical encounters. Sure, they can get a little overindulgent, and I've said so in the past many times, but I, for one, would rather all those puzzles that we were promised in Penumbra.
So just like we saw with the Whisper of the Worm quest that came out recently, like those kind of secrets that players discover themselves are super exciting. What if we took an entire release, let leak the name Penumbra, but what if everything else was the mystery box that players will uncover collaboratively?
So that was a fucking lie.
Instead, we get the 33rd flavor of I can't believe it's not a horde mode! And if you're wondering why I'm harping on this, it's because what the Season Pass essentially boils down to is 3 different versions of killing wave after wave after wave of Destiny's brain-dead AI. The Menagerie slightly flips the script on this by adding a couple of mechanics, but at the end of the day, the Menagerie is unfailable. So it really doesn't matter if you know the mechanics or not. And it's not like you get punished or rewarded for knowing them either way. When you get down to it, the core of Destiny is essentially the open world hubs, strikes, PvP, and raids. The stuff that gets reused ad nauseum every time Bungie wants to pretend they've made a new exotic quest, only to use the absolute worst versions of these, slap them on a piece of armor, and act like it's new content that we should be thankful for. However, instead of fleshing out all this content, things that we actually play, things that will far outlive Forge's Reckoning in the Menagerie, Bungie decides to add Forge's Reckoning in the Menagerie. I'm not saying that if Bungie wanted to avoid the proverbial anal prolapse that is content crunch because making content is hard, maybe, just maybe, they would get more bang for their buck if they periodically release strike packs or PvP maps or the occasional raid alongside vendor refreshes, instead of trying to reinvent the horde mode every 3 months. I'm not saying that they would get more bang for their buck, I'm just saying that the player base would. And hey, I'm not bitching because I like the sound of my own voice. Raids, strikes, and PvP maps and modes are the core content of Destiny. Forges? Who the fuck plays Forges anymore? Hell, they're best when not playing them. The Menagerie? That shit didn't die. It was fucking murdered. Even Gambit isn't safe, because in these very same blog posts, Bungie talks about removing one of the modes because they can't support both. Now, if Gambit had the same player engagement that PvP, strikes, and raids do, this wouldn't be a conversation. Bungie would find some magic way of supporting both modes in perpetuity. I mean, that was clearly the original intent because they both exist. And speaking of content more disposable than a Call of Duty single player, is anybody else terrified at the prospect that the shit that you're going to be buying over the next season, starting with Shadowkeep and including Shadowkeep, is going to go in and out with the tide? I'll read this verbatim for those of you who might have missed it. An evolving world. There's an aspirational vision of what evolving could mean for Destiny. Someday, Destiny may become a dynamic world, where the world changes each season. We want playing Destiny to feel like you're playing in a game world with true momentum, a universe that is going somewhere, a game where things are happening, not just in terms of new items and activities, but also in terms of narrative. It frequently seemed like Destiny was treading water in terms of moving the world narrative forward. We want to tackle this in Destiny 2's third year. During Season 8, a new situation will unfold on the moon. I'm being cagey here because I'm reluctant to spoil anything. Over the course of the season, part of the game will change, before the situation culminates in an event that will ultimately resolve it. And its content will be exhausted, but this resolution sets up for the events of Season 9, which, again, adds something new to the game and resolves it. Something that too will go away, but not before setting up for Season 10, etc. This differs from last year's annual pass, which permanently added activities to the game. This year we'll see events that last for 3 months and offer new rewards to chase. Though, at the end of the period, some of these activities will go away. For a time, the rewards will too. But we also acknowledge that part of playing Destiny is collecting all of the stuff. So, in future seasons, the weapons and legendary armor associated with these seasonal activities will be added to other reward sites. Hey Bungie, you want to move the story forward? 2 words for you. Dreaming City. ... New sentence. Do something with it. Second, ladies and gents, boys and girls, guardians of all ages, welcome to the asshole-clenching terror of the age of digital media, where your purchase is nothing more than a glorified rent. I mean, we've already kind of seen this with trials and faction rallies going the way of the dodo, but there's a blatantness here that's kind of impressive. Look, as much as I just whinged about the disposability of content, gutting that content at the end of each season isn't the fucking answer either. Sure, I may ask unironically who still plays Forges, but at least I can still go play Forges once the season's over. This sounds like once we're done ghostbusting the moon and move on to whatever's next, a portion of that content will be gutted and sent off to the big old content farm in the sky, right next to the original iteration of Destiny 1, 2, trials, and faction rallies. And hey, I understand the basic argument here. Currently, Destiny is 88 gigs. With Shadowkeep, it's likely going to be closer to or exceeding 100 gigs. This, in and of itself, isn't an issue, but there's only so much code you can throw at a game before things start to break, and nobody has ever accused Destiny of having the most stable engine in the industry. At the same time, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, why the actual fuck do we have, for example, 2 different weapon systems still in the game? The Year 1 static loot and the Year 2 random rolls, on top of 3 different armor systems once Shadowkeep is released. The Year 1 armor system, the Year 2 armor system, and then Armor 2.0. All of these cosmetics and systems seem rather redundant, more so when they're actually redundant. And perhaps this is a false equivalent, but if the size of a single set of Skyrim armor on the mod page is even remotely indicative of how much space this stuff is taking up, then it's no real wonder why Destiny runs like old people fuck at times. Perhaps maybe, just maybe, some of this shit needs outright purged from the system. And since we're talking about a good old-fashioned purge and burn, do we need so many white items, green items, blue items? I'm not saying get rid of all of them, but the time somebody spends at levels where these items are actually useful is minuscule at best. And hey, I get it, some people like their blue armor and their Year 1 weapons. Hell, I spent most of Destiny 2 Year 1 using a blue helmet, simply because I liked the way that it looked. But do we really need more than one set of blues, greens, and whites? And let's be realistic, if you're given the choice between a random blue collecting dust in your vault, and the possibility that Destiny would even run just a little bit better, which one are you going to go with? Probably Destiny running better. And hey, in a perfect world, this wouldn't be an issue. But before Bungie starts talking about phasing out DLC, before they've even sold us the fucking DLC, maybe, just maybe, we could, I don't know, get rid of some of the old useless stuff first. But hey, at least to give Bungie a modicum of credit here, at least the seasons are buy-in, meaning you only have to buy the seasons that you want. But moving forward. Now, the last year wasn't all bad. Sure, the keystone piece of each content had the shelf life of old milk. The lore was either fucking amazing, or a rancid mix of useless shit and fanfiction. Strikes didn't really change because, well, after Forsaken we didn't get any strikes. Unless you want to call those glorified raid lairs strikes, which I'm not going to argue with you. PvP fared better overall, if for no other reason than balance patches, and content-specific weapon dumps, and new exotics and stuff like that. But don't get me wrong, PvP is still an unmitigated shit show. Oh, let me count the ways. Matchmaking, supers, spawns, weapon balance, and bloom. Hell, even Luke Smith couldn't help but make fun of the shit show that PvP is. Quote, Part 3, supers everywhere. Masterwork guns, super mods, orbs, everywhere. Right now, for a pretty decent player running super mods, the time it takes to gain a super is under 2 minutes in PvP. If you compare the duration and damage of a roaming super in Destiny 2 to roaming supers in Destiny 1, you'll see that they're more powerful now than ever before. We didn't even have roaming Arc Titans in Destiny 1, but every time I play PvP, I get killed by one, twice, in the same super. We all know that the damage dealing capabilities of Guardians have gotten out of control. We know the supers have too. See? It annoys them as well. I'm not the only one. Then we had the glorified raid lairs that were, hit or miss. And props to Eververse. According to this post, the overpriced skins for Whisper of the Worm paid for the fantastic Outbreak Prime quest. Granted, we have no clue how true that actually is, and I have to imagine that there are people whose backsides are still a little sore from Whisper of the Worm's nerf who bought both of these skins. So this very well could be a little piece of placation, you know, a consolation prize. But who knows? All of that said, I would be lying if I said I didn't like all the constant updates to the game, regardless of quality. And regardless of how tenable that might actually be for Bungie in the future, considering Bungie is no longer suckling at the teat of Activision, and while in some instances that certainly was a cause for celebration, Bungie is now self-publishing, which means they don't have the help of High Moon Studios or Vicarious Visions, and they're developing Shadowkeep on their own, which has already slipped its initial release date. They're also promising another year of Season Pass content, which they've already stated was much harder than they anticipated the first go-round. And let's be honest, these weren't the equivalent of normal Destiny DLCs like we saw with Warmind or Curse of Osiris. These were pretty focused, pretty stripped down, pretty lacking in content, at least comparatively speaking, to their DLC counterparts. On top of that, Bungie is developing the next Destiny game, which actually has a lot of hurdles that nobody's talking about. One, they're developing it for PC and console, which Vicarious Visions were the one who developed the PC version of Destiny 2. Second, they're developing it for consoles. Now I know what you're thinking, how is that any different than normal? Well, if Halo Infinite is any indication, the next console generation will be in 2020, which means, if nothing else, Bungie has to port multiple versions of Destiny 3 to different platforms. All I'm saying is I don't envy them this year, and I wouldn't be surprised if Shadowkeep is the first in a long line of things getting pushed back. Let's hope it's not, but I wouldn't be surprised. And to be clear, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. In fact, I was elated at the news that Shadowkeep was being pushed back, because, as we are all painfully aware, a rushed game is bad forever. And if it sounds like I'm nitpicking Destiny to death or trying to ride the hate train, I'm not. I love the franchise. Everything from the music to the aesthetic to the dichotomy of exotic weapons like Thorn and Lumia and Thousand Voices existing in the same world as the garbage dive gun that is Cerberus Plus One. The gunplay is some of the best in the industry, even if the competitive balance is a fucking joke and PvP has leaps and bounds to go. And hell, even as much as I harp on the more recent lore, for being what boils down to glorified fanfiction, it has started to reincorporate the cosmic horror aspect of Destiny. In fact, wouldn't you just know it? The first main expansion after the departure of the narrative lead Christine Thompson is a good old-fashioned Lovecraftian horror story. Look, I'm not saying correlation equals causality, but it is an interesting aside. Destiny certainly isn't Deadstiny. For as cute as that joke is, we have seen a game with all the promise in the world squander it, because the development team seemed paralyzed and didn't know what to do next. Destiny's saving grace, I think, is that no matter how bad it gets, the development team is always pushing forward. Destiny is an extremely flawed but good game. Hell, after a firm dose of both The Moon's Haunted and Bungie finally releasing the Vex Void trailer from 2017, my Johnsonville bratwurst is in the upright and locked position. I am, dare I say, even hyped and optimistic for the future of Destiny. But when talking about the last year, or hell, even the last 2 release cycles, we have to really be honest with ourselves. Destiny has spent a long time with an identity crisis. And not everything that we want fixed will be able to be fixed within the confines of Destiny 2. Much of it is very foundational, for example, subclasses. In fact, Destiny currently only has a handful of large issues that I believe can be fixed. Most of which either stem from a lack of PvE content, which I think is always going to be an issue unfortunately, as Bungie is not only gearing up for PvE content to be straight up disposable from season to season, and not in the hyperbolic way where it's still around, it's just dead, but in the they actually took it out of the game kind of way, but also because the community is sort of insatiable in this regard, which is kind of on us and kind of on Bungie. We devour content on the front end in preparation for the raid, without much regard for that content in and of itself. Then, once the raid has come and gone, there's a lot of nada to do except exotic quests or waiting for the next piece of DLC. Forsaken somewhat alleviated this by having the Dreaming City really open up after the raid was beat, but all that momentum was lost with the release of Black Armory, when the story largely derailed. Yes, there was some Aldrin stuff and Mara left the Dreaming City, but really, the story, at least the story of Forsaken, took a back seat to the new content. So instead of being carried forward by the new story, it was just kind of sidelined. Bungie was like, and the Dreaming City, something, 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 endless recursion of time, something, 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 now go play the new content, without any resolution for the things set up in Forsaken. And to Bungie's credit, not only do they seem cognizant of this issue, they seem to be taking steps to actively fix it. But how do we fix the other issues intrinsic to any dump of PvE content? You know, short of just making more PvE content. One thing they could do is not have the raid literally days after a content release drops. We now have a contest modifier. So trying to play gatekeeper in an arbitrary, hey, we just released this content, oh yeah, by the way, the raid's 3 days later kind of way, doesn't make any sense whatsoever anymore. With a contest modifier, it doesn't matter how much gear you've grinded for, how much stuff you saved up. Bungie can set any level they want, and it doesn't matter how high over that level you are because it's not going to matter because of the contest modifier. So we don't really need to have this sort of incentive to burn through content faster because the raid is just around the corner. They can, I don't know, maybe wait a week and let people enjoy the content, and still keep the sanctity of the raid race with this modifier. In lieu of that, do more Dreaming City-like content, where a larger portion of the content is moved to after the raid is completed, instead of being loaded on the front end of the release like every other piece of Destiny content ever. The other issues Destiny faces are issues that Bungie has, to their credit, within this huge gargantuan blog post, already proposed fixes for, such as Crucible matchmaking. And I'm not even being sarcastic here, they proposed a pretty decent fix. Will it work? Who knows. Does it sound good on paper? Absolutely. Once again, for those who don't know or couldn't be bothered to read the blog post, the changes are as follows. Bungie has removed Quick Play and competitive nodes from the director. If you're looking for an experience like Quick Play, Bungie has added Classic Mix, a connection-based playlist like Quick Play today. Classic Mix includes Control, Clash, and Supremacy. Competitive is now replaced by 3v3 Survival, which now awards glory. They've also added a Survival Solo Queue playlist, which also awards glory. So, finally, they've added 6v6 Control as its own playlist. They state, with the potential influx of new players this fall, we want to have a playlist that signals to new players where to start. And Control kind of is the Destiny PvP experience. It's certainly how many of the maps are built. They've added a 6v6 and a 4v4 weekly rotator. These rotator playlists will have modes like Clash, Supremacy, Mayhem, Lockdown, and Countdown. They've also removed some of the underperforming maps from matchmaking. They're also reevaluating the way that players are matched against one another, trying to figure out a better way to achieve that 50-50 win-loss ratio. But like I said, this is something that we need to see. It's kind of the same thing with the super economy. They're gonna do something. What that something or some things are, who knows? We'll have to find out before we can really make a judgment call on it. As far as weapon balance goes, first, at least on console, remove Bloom. Second, when Bungie inevitably takes a sledgehammer to special weapons, let's not do what we did in Destiny 1. Let's try something novel. Let's try, I don't know, for the sake of argument, only dealing with the weapons that are problems? You know, change things up a little bit. There are a handful of outliers, like shotguns, that are lethal at questionable ranges, so just decrease the range by 15 to 20%, and give considerable thought to removing range enhancement perks. And second verse, same as the first when it comes to fusion rifles. Though there really are only two outliers when it comes to fusion rifles. I say two because once you nerf Air Intel, Epicurean will take its place. So So reduce the range by 15 to 20% and increase the charge time. And I'm not saying increase the charge time by anything ridiculous, just a hair. Just enough so that you're not getting back-to-back fusion rifle kills while in gunfights. With snipers, just reduce aim assist and bullet magnetism by a lot, while simultaneously yeeting flinch out of the game. Start there. Then there's changes already coming to Heavy. Basically, in 6v6, they're changing the way that Heavy works. They're kind of going back to Destiny 1, but not really. Quote, we're making some changes to heavy ammo in Destiny 2. Heavy ammo will be communal in 6v6 playlist. We're reducing the amount of ammo per brick in PvP for certain 6v6 archetypes. And basically by communal, what they mean is instead of everybody getting heavy ammo who's around when the heavy ammo is picked up, you get a window of time to go up and interact with the heavy ammo crate and get heavy ammo from it. The only critique I have to that is if that's how it's going to work, nobody drops heavy ammo on death. Once it's gone, it's gone. For everything else, with as long and as dense as this blog post was, we need to see the raw numbers when it releases. And that's just the truth of it. Destiny 2 Year 2 was an entertaining experiment that bloated the game but did very little to evolve it past its initial course correction. That never really brought Destiny 2 to being as good as Destiny 1 was, or evolving on it. Shadowkeep, in fact, is really the beginning of the first evolution to any core system that we've seen in Destiny since Destiny 1. When people look at Armor 2.0 and everything that it's doing to move the franchise forward, but they say, yeah, but that's how Destiny 2 should have shipped, I really can't argue with that because they're not wrong. It really is the evolution of what Destiny should have been. Destiny 2 Year 1 was a regression and spent a lot of time clawing back all the ground that had been made with Destiny 1. Destiny 2 Year 2 was Destiny 1 light, but still not close. It was a hollow facsimile. And Destiny 2 Year 3 is finally the evolution of the franchise that we've been waiting for, which is being said in equal parts praise and scorn. But hey, those are just my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below, and like always, stay frosty.